It's wild that individuals are capable of brainwashing entire groups of people, to such an extreme that they'd abandon everything they've ever known and lose grasp on the difference between good and evil. Learning about the sexual, physical, and psychological abuse that took place in various infamous cults will seriously send shivers down your spine. These are the most famous cults of all time. You don't need to know much about true crime to know the name Charles Manson, which almost 50 years after his most heinous acts is still synonymous with cult leader. Manson started his group in San Francisco in 1967 and later that year moved to Los Angeles, where he tried and failed to establish himself as a musician. Manson became obsessed with the Beatles' song Helter Skelter and started using the term to describe a race war he believed would usher in the apocalypse, and in August 1969, he sent a group of his followers to a house in Benedict Canyon and told them to kill everyone inside. The victims included actress Sharon Tate, then married to Roman Polanski, and celebrity hairdresser Jay Sebring. The next night, Manson's followers murdered Rosemary and Leno LaBianca at their home in Los Feliz. Some people believe Manson ordered the murders because he thought it would kickstart his Helter Skelter concept, while others think he believed the Tate house still belonged to a music producer who'd refused to give him a record deal. Still others claim that the murders were the Manson family's attempt at copycat murders designed to get their friend out of jail. No matter the motive, though, commentators at the time saw the murders as the official end of the 1960s culture of free love. Known as one of Australia's most notorious cults, the family began with Hamilton Byrne, a yoga teacher who believed herself to be a reincarnation of Jesus Christ. She teamed up with parapsychologist Raynor Johnson in the mid-1960s to form what was initially known as the Great White Brotherhood. Over the course of several years, Hamilton Byrne adopted 28 children by receiving the kids as gifts from members, as well as by falsifying papers to convince others to give their children up for adoption. All in the hope of creating a master race that would survive the apocalypse she believed to be imminent. While other adults in the group were known as either aunties or uncles, Hamilton Byrne claimed to be the biological mother of all 28 children. She also told the kids she was Jesus Christ, and when they didn't live up to her exacting standards, they were beaten, starved, or dosed with LSD. The cult went undetected for years, as the children were forced to hide whenever visitors arrived. But in 1987, the group's headquarters was finally raided and all children were removed from the premises. Hamilton Byrne was only ever charged with falsifying birth certificates, and in 2019, she died from dementia at 98 years old, having never faced consequences for her actions. Angel's Landing is the name of the 20-acre compound outside of Wichita, Kansas, where Lou Castro and a small group of people lived an inexplicably extravagant life in the early 2000s. Castro's followers were convinced that he was an angel and a seer who could look into the future and know when you were going to die. Already suspicious of Castro's luxury vehicles and money that no one could explain, there was no paper trail on Castro. Local law enforcement took an active interest when Patricia Hughes, a member of the Angel's Landing community, tragically turned up dead on the compound in 2003. Then when Patricia's husband died in a freak accident in 2006, local detective Ron Goodwin dived into every bit of personal and financial information he could find on the people living at Angel's Landing. What he found was disturbing. Expensive life insurance policies were taken out on people in Castro's circle and cashed in by members when someone in the makeshift family accidentally died. This pattern occurred around every 2.5 years. But the detective couldn't find any records for the mysterious leader Castro. In 2010, Castro moved from Kansas to Tennessee and adopted a new identity, but he was soon arrested by the FBI for aggravated identity theft and fraudulent use of a social security card number. During Castro's 2-year stint in federal prison, Goodwin and the FBI discovered, according to the Wichita Eagle, that Lou Castro was really Daniel Perez, a man from Texas with many police reports, including a case involving sex crimes against 2 girls, 11 and 14, until he fled Texas. More witnesses came forward, accusing Perez of abuse and pointing to him for the murder of Patricia Hughes. Perez was charged with 28 felonies, and in February 2015, he was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 80 years in prison. Founded by Shoko Asahara in 1984, Aum Shinrikyo first made headlines in the late 80s amid accusations that Asahara was forcing members to donate money to the group and holding them against their will. Like many cult leaders, Asahara believed in an imminent doomsday, this time caused by a world war started by the United States. According to him, only his followers would survive. In 1995, the group executed a sarin gas attack in the Tokyo subway, which caused the deaths of 12 people and injured 50 more. After that attack, Japanese authorities learned that the group had also been responsible for the murder of lawyer Tsutsumi Sakamoto, who was working on a class action lawsuit against Aum Shinrikyo at the time of his death. The group also murdered his wife and child. Asahara was eventually sentenced to death in 2018. Founded by Marshall Applewhite and Bonnie Nettles in the 1970s, Heaven's Gate was an ascetic cult that had a complicated belief system involving aliens, spaceships, and an imminent recycling of the planet Earth. After Nettles died in 1985, Applewhite took the group to even further extremes, and in 1997, he began claiming that a spacecraft was following the Hale-Bopp comet. This spacecraft would carry the Heaven's Gate members to the next level of existence, while living in a rented home in San Diego. Applewhite and 38 followers died by suicide by taking phenobarbital mixed with applesauce. They all wore the same uniform and Nike shoes and had $5.75 in their pockets. As of today, the Heaven's Gate website still exists and is maintained by 2 of the group's followers. The Branch Davidians broke off from the Davidian Seventh-day Adventists in 1955 but didn't make headlines until the infamous Waco siege of 1993. In 1981, David Koresh, born Vernon Howell, took over the group, which was headquartered at a commune called Mount Carmel. After allegations of child abuse within the commune, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms and Explosives attempted to raid Mount Carmel, but a gun battle erupted and 10 people were killed. The FBI then launched a siege that lasted for 51 days and ended with the compound being destroyed by fire. Koresh was killed along with 76 others. A governmental investigation later concluded that the Branch Davidians had started the fire themselves. In the 1950s, Indiana native Jim Jones founded a church that he claimed promoted socialism and equality, with religious elements of Christianity. Initially, he was little more than a charismatic hustler, who faked faith healings by having audience plants pull chicken livers out of congregants' mouths, but as the years progressed, he demanded more and more of followers. In the early 1970s, Jones moved his group to California and set them up in a commune-like settlement in Redwood Valley. Jones eventually came to believe that nuclear war was imminent and moved his followers again to the South American country of Guyana, which he thought would be outside the potential danger zone. The group lived there for several years as the People's Temple Agricultural Project, but after former members started speaking out against the church, San Francisco Congressman Leo Ryan decided to travel to Jonestown to investigate claims of abuse. Temple security guards opened fire on Ryan's group. And back at the settlement, Jones ordered his followers to drink a cyanide-laced beverage. A total of 918 people died in the incident, and until 9/11, it was the largest loss of American civilian life in history. If you thought cults were a thing of the past, think again. Keith Raniere started NXIVM in 1998, positioning the group as a self-help organization with workshops and classes on empowerment. NXIVM amassed more than 18,000 followers across North America until 2017, when NXIVM members came forward to expose the abusive practices of a secret society within the group. Women were recruited under the false pretense that they were joining a sisterhood of sorts, but it ended up being a sex cult. A pyramid scheme existed within the group, with Raniere, who members called Vanguard, at the top, masters who recruited other women to the secretive group, and at the bottom were the newest recruits, who were referred to as slaves. Advertisement. Continue reading below. A former member recounted to the New York Times that in order to be admitted to the secret club, she had to give her master naked photos and other compromising documents that would be used as blackmail if she ever told anyone about the group's existence. She was also told that another part of the initiation process was getting a small tattoo. But instead of a tattoo, the new members were told to undress, and the master branded them with a design that included Ranieri's initials right above their pelvic area. Each woman was instructed to say, "Master, please brand me, it would be an honor." In 2020, Ranieri was tried in court, where more than a dozen women came forward with statements regarding his psychological and sexual abuse. He was convicted of many crimes, including sex trafficking, racketeering, and child pornography. Victims were as young as 15 years old. Ranieri was sentenced to life in prison, but in a court filing, his lawyers wrote, he is not sorry for his conduct or his choices. Initially called Teens for Christ, Children of God was founded in 1968 by rogue preacher David Berg in Huntington Beach, California. Attracting young runaways and hippies, Berg preached a kind of worship that combined the ways of Jesus Christ with the free love movement of the 60s. Group living, zealous proselytizing, and isolated communes were all pillars of the Children of God Church. Members, who amounted to 15,000 people across the world at its peak, didn't work or go to school. The COG didn't believe in the nuclear family. So children were grouped together and lived separately from their parents. In the late 1970s, COG became notorious for the sexual practices that one of Berg's own daughters later described as religious prostitution. Berg coined the term flirty fishing, a sexual practice in which women would allegedly have sex with men to bring them into the cult. Berg promoted and encouraged the sexualization of children within the COG community. As Berg manipulated the COG family with his sadistic practices, members started leaving the community, including the families of actors Joaquin Phoenix and Rose McGowan, who both grew up in Children of God communes. Former COG members began coming forward in the early 1990s, describing an environment that permitted and encouraged the physical and sexual abuse of young children. Ricky Dupuy appeared on a talk show in 1993 and revealed that he'd been ordered by the group to rape a 10-year-old. Dupuy later committed suicide, like many other members of the group, including Berg's son Ricky Rodriguez, who was sexually abused throughout his life by his father and the group. The Children of God cult continues to exist and now goes by the name Family International, although the group claims that the horrific practices are a thing of the past. The story of the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints Church is kind of like Unbreakable Kimmy Schmidt IRL, only so much more horrifying. The fundamentalist Mormon movement first emerged in the early 20th century so members could freely practice polygamy, although things really took a turn for the worse when Warren Jeffs assumed leadership of the FLDS Church following his father's death in 2002. Within a week, he had married almost all his father's wives and decreed himself responsible for arranging marriages within the cult, including marriages between his followers and underage girls. It wasn't long before his bad deeds caught up to him. In 2005, Jeffs was charged with sexual assault on a minor, among other crimes, and a warrant was put out for his arrest. By 2011, he was finally sentenced for sexually assaulting 2 underage girls, who he claimed to be his wives. He's currently serving life plus 20 years in a Texas state prison. This sect formed in the Kanunga district of Uganda in the 1980s and taught its members that they had to follow the 10 Commandments in order to survive the apocalypse, which the leaders believed was coming in 2000. When January 1, 2000, passed without incident, members began to question why their leaders had failed to get their apocalypse date right, and leaders then predicted that the real end would come on March 17. It did, but not because of anything supernatural. The leaders set fire to the movement church, killing as many as 530 people inside, authorities later discovered the bodies of more victims at the group's other properties in Uganda and concluded that the leaders had orchestrated the killing in response to turmoil caused by their repeated failure to predict the apocalypse. Founded in Switzerland in 1984 by Joseph D. Mambro and Luc Jurek, the Order of the Solar Temple traced its roots to the medieval Knights Templar but also thought the world would end in the 1990s. Things took a turn in 1994 when D. Mambro reportedly ordered the murder of an infant in Quebec. Later that year, more than 50 members of the group were murdered or died by suicide and the group's buildings were destroyed by fire. Additional members died by suicide in 1995 and 1997. Wildly enough, the Order of the Solar Temple still remains active today and boasts several hundred members. Synanon may just be one of the most dangerous cults in American history. But believe it or not, it started out as a drug rehabilitation program. Founded by Charles Dederick in 1958, Synanon transformed into an alternative community centered on group truth-telling sessions, known as The Game, in the early 1960s, and by the 1970s, it had evolved into the Church of Synanon. Over the years, Dederick grew more and more hungry for power, charging his members exorbitant fees and forcing them to do taxing physical labor. He also developed a hit list for those who tried to shut his community down, which included lawyer Paul Morrance, who nearly died as a result of a murder attempt arranged by Dederick. Eventually, Synanon was shut down in 1991 due to tax fraud, destruction of evidence, and terrorism, and Dederick died 6 years later. Controversial Indian guru Bhagwan Sri Rajneesh's rise to fame began in the 1960s when he traveled throughout India speaking out against socialism and the orthodoxy of mainstream religions. He also advocated for a more open attitude to human sexuality, earning his reputation as the sex guru. By 1981, Rajneesh decided to refocus his efforts in the United States, and he opened a facility known as Rajneeshpuram in Wasco County, Oregon, causing a huge conflict with locals. What followed was a series of legal battles concerning the ashram's construction as well as a series of serious crimes committed by followers of the Rajneesh movement, including a mass food poisoning attack with salmonella bacteria and an attempt to assassinate U.S. Attorney Charles H. Turner. Rajneesh blamed his personal secretary Ma Anand Sheela and her supporters for those crimes, but he was later deported. He ended up returning to India, where he revived and ran the Pune ashram until his death in 1990.